So I arrived in Rwanda after my MBA in August of 1989. And already on the ground, you could sense tension. Local newspapers that were basically fueling hatred. Politicians that were calling for acts of violence against certain groups of people. So I was in Rwanda until 1995, and then the vice chairman of Heineken called me one day and said, Eugene, you've done a good job helping to rebuild the brewery. We now have a new opportunity for you to consider, and that is to go to the US and work for Heineken USA. I took over from somebody who had created a number of issues in the brewery, and this resulted in a shooting within the brewery that basically had one of the directors killed. A number of people that I've discovered in the Heineken system are currently, in some of the most senior leadership positions, including the current Heineken CEO.
Hello there. Welcome to the Longform Podcast. My guest this week on the Longform is Eugene Ubalijoro. Eugene is a Rwandan business executive who serves as vice president at Molson Coors Beverage Company, responsible for sales in central region states of the US. Hello there. Before we dive into today's conversation, have you subscribed to our channel yet? If you haven't, do so. And remember to share your thoughts with us in the comments below and like this video. Your support means a lot. Now let's get into it. Mr. Eugene, welcome to the Longform.
Thank you.
So it's not very often that I get to meet such a high-powered executive, especially in the US. And I know that you usually you don't have a lot of time. You're here for Rwanda Day to speak on a panel. And I, first of all, want to thank you for the time that you've given to me.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So before we go into the hard questions, I want to start with what I'd call a softball question.
Okay.
Which is trying to get to know you, Eugene, and the life you've lived to get to the place that you are. You were born in 1964 in Rwanda.
That's correct.
Yes, and you lived in the country until you were 12.
Correct, yes.
So I'm someone who was born in 1980, but not even in Rwanda. I was born in Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very curious about what 1964 Rwanda kind of looked like. And for those 12 years that you lived in the country, could you take us back and paint a picture of what the country was like, what your childhood was like? Did you go to school every day like everyone else? What was that experience like?
So when I look back at my childhood, I have to say that Rwanda was more rural. We lived in Rutongo, which is about 25 kilometers north of Kigali. And I attended the Belgian school. So I used to drive every day to Kigali to go to school. And back then the roads were not tarred. So it was a long 1.5 hour drive from Rutongo to Kigali.
Every day?
Every day during the school year.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I can imagine, Rutongo, if I'm not mistaken, is where the mines are.
That's correct.
Yes.
So back then, the mines were run by Belgian expatriates who basically lived on the premises and managed the operations from there.
And so 12 years in Rwanda, could you, you've kind of given us an idea, because now when I think about the journey between Rutongo and Kigali, without all the traffic, it's maybe 15 minutes. It's curious. I'm very curious. Like, what is a childhood like in that kind of rural Rwanda?
So back then, other than the schoolwork that we did every day, I spent my time playing soccer, or football as we call it back home, with friends from the village. We didn't really have many activities or attractions. We didn't have any TV. We had radio, which basically worked a few hours a day. Rwanda was not as modern, was not as open to the outside world as it is today.
Yeah.
But you know what? As young people, we didn't know. So we were just content with what we had back then.
And then you turn 12.
Yes.
And then you fly from Rwanda, a Rwanda with barely any roads, no TV at the time, barely any radio, and then fly to the States. That must have been a shock to the system.
Yes. Actually, before going to the States, we went to Uganda. We lived in Uganda for 3 years, where my father back then was a diplomat. And from there, we went to the US. And for me, going to the US was a cultural shock, obviously.
I can imagine.
Leaving Africa and, finding yourself in a fast-moving, very modern society with big cars, people who look completely different than we did, televisions that work 24 hours a day, different foods, different drinks, different beverages, different cultures. That was a shock to, the mind that I had back then, the mind of a young boy who was about to become a teenager.
And of course, you had come from a largely Francophone country.
Correct.
And now I can imagine you're not just dealing with cultural shocks, it's also linguistic challenges.
Yes. So yes, back then I spoke in Rwanda in French, and we were lucky to be enrolled actually in the French International School. So we went through a bilingual education where we could learn both in English and French. And we also were taught the Spanish language as a third language. So today I can say that I'm fairly fluent in Kinyarwanda, French, English, and quite proficient in Spanish.
Yeah. And your college experience?
So my college experience actually took place here in the city of Washington, D.C. It's always a pleasure for me to be back in D.C. because I went to Georgetown in class of 86, and I majored in finance and international management.
Yes.
Yes.
Did you ever get the chance to try out for the famous Hoyas?
No, but I can tell you, Patrick Ewing was a close friend of mine. We used to study together.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yes, and we used to actually take classes together.
Yes.
At Georgetown, I only played soccer because that was a sport that I had always been involved in. When I was in high school, I was captain of the varsity soccer team, and I played center midfield on the team. So at Georgetown, we played intramural sports, basketball, soccer, but I wasn't good enough to be part of the famous Georgetown Hoya team that won the championship in 1985.
Yes. And, it's rare that someone who's kind of gone through the experiences that you went, whether it's through school and high school and even after high school and uni, because then you also do a post-grad, to then decide that, you know what, I am going to leave this system, this country, this place that I've gotten used to that, has given me my education, to fly back to that rural country that you had left all those years back. You went back to Rwanda, interestingly enough, in 1990.
Correct.
For me, 1990 means something totally different.
Absolutely, yes.
I am a child of refugees, so 1990 was, I think about it as the year that started the Liberation War. But at the time, I'm not thinking that you thought that there was going to be a civil war of that sort. So you decide to go back to Rwanda.
Yes.
What was your thinking?
That's a good question. Now, when I decided to go back to Rwanda, I wanted to rediscover my country because I have been living outside of Rwanda for, almost 14 years. And I guess it was a romantic idea of mine that I had to go back home. And when I arrived back in Rwanda, I was disappointed in what was going on back then.
If I may, before I interrupt you, so was it before October or after October?
It was before.
Okay.
So I arrived in Rwanda after my MBA in August of 1989. And already on the ground, you could sense tension. Local newspapers that were basically fueling hatred, politicians that were calling for acts of violence against certain groups of people, and me having spent, the last 14 years of my life in a society where people were striving for a great life, living together, coming back to Rwanda and experiencing all those social, let's say, tensions was a big shock to my system as well.
I can imagine. Take us back to that space. So you fly in. Were you, I wouldn't say that, were you even speaking the same language? And I don't mean this in Kinyarwanda, but you're coming from here.
So I came from here. First of all, people were telling me that I should join the government because back then it was a trend to, when you left school, you were going to public sector because that was the best way to eventually make a living.
Yes.
And I could sense that the country was heading in the wrong direction. And I refused to join the public sector. And people thought I was crazy back then. So instead, I applied for jobs in the private sector, and I was hired by Bralirwa. And in hindsight, my parents, family members, basically recognized that I was right. If I had accepted to join the government back then, I don't know where I would be today.
I mean, I guess it's one of those moments, I think there's always a fork in the road in someone's journey where it will go this way or that, and it's just maybe providence or good decision making.
Yes, I think it's more than that. I guess my cultural background, my education had trained me to be more inclusive in my thinking, to be more open to different ideas. And I disliked the fact that you had a group of Rwandans who were outside of the country, who could not come back to their country. And that is something I was sensitive to.
Yeah.
And I felt down deep inside that the country was on a path that would eventually end up in some sort of, chaotic environment.
Now, you are you fly in and out of the country. You see Rwanda for what it is.
Yes.
Back, if you can think about what Rwanda is now, it would be 35 years after you first came back. Did you ever think that Kigali would ever be what it is today?
Absolutely not. I mean, back then we were not encouraged to think big, to dream big. I would have never imagined that Kigali would be the safest city in Africa. I would never have imagined that Kigali would be as developed as it is today. I would never imagine that Kigali would be an urban city that is open for business, that has the capabilities to basically host the world through different activities.
Yeah. So since 1990, you've been in the brewery business.
Yes.
First at Rwanda's Bralirwa, then Heineken, and finally now Molson Coors.
Correct.
What about this particular industry has kept your attention for the last 35 years?
Ever since I was 10 years old, when I was in Uganda, I went to visit the Pepsi Cola plant. And from that day, I knew I wanted to work in the beverage industry. Why? Because at the end of the visit of the plant, they gave us free drinks. So I was very impressed by that. But at the same time, I like the idea of basically producing beverages and being able to sell them. So when I finished my education, my MBA actually, I wrote a thesis on creating brewery. And the idea was to create the brewery in Montreal. And before creating the brewery in Montreal, I decided to go home to see my parents. At that time, Heineken heard that there was a young Rwandan who was looking for a job or eventually getting into a brewery venture. They hired me on the spot and gave me a job. That's what happened.
And then 30 plus years after, you're still
34, yes.
You're still in the business.
Correct. So they hired me on the spot, and they basically dangled a carrot towards me and said, if you join us, we'll put you on an international training program. We'll send you in a few countries for you to be able to understand the profession of a brewer. And then you'll come back to Rwanda as a commercial director. But that whole program was kept confidential because there was a fear that the government might eventually disrupt it.
Oh, that's interesting. Wait, so why would a government disrupt? Because when I think about the Rwanda that I live in, right, and its push for talent, the presidential scholars and the opportunities that are given to young Rwandans, and the Rwandans who are like Clara Kamanzi, who's coming from government and then going straight to the NBA Africa. Yes. There's literally a push to send our best and brightest to go and get experience and get networks. I don't understand what would the thinking have been that would have decided that no. This young Rwandan should not get more talented.
So back then, a number of people were vying for the role of commercial director of Bralirwa. And these people were using their political network instead of using their qualifications to try to land that job. And Heineken people, or the Heineken leadership, was aware of that. That's why my traineeship was kept confidential for 2 years. And then when I returned to Rwanda, I was appointed, as a commercial director. Obviously, that did not please everyone, especially people who worked within the organization. But in the end, they realized that there was a huge gap between their skills and my skill set.
Yes.
And we ended up working together. So I was in Rwanda before the genocide against the Tutsis. I was there during the genocide, and I was there after the genocide to help rebuild the brewery.
Would you like to partner with us here at the Longform? If you do, you can send an email to us at longformrwanda@gmail.com. Partner with us and become part of Rwanda's most exciting and in-depth podcast. I'd be interested in knowing that process of rebuilding. A lot of things were damaged.
Yes.
Not just the country, but even I can imagine the business itself.
Correct.
And now you are commercial director, and you're just trying to, in a country that's broken, you're now trying to, I don't want to sound crude, but you're trying to make money, right? You're trying to sell a product.
Correct.
It must have been not traumatic, but it must have really been the job of your life.
Well, I think, when the genocide was stopped around July 4th, I was back in Rwanda 2 weeks after, because actually I was able to escape and go to Nairobi and then Kinshasa. And Heineken helped me come back to Rwanda via Burundi. So I was in Rwanda around July 20th, 1994. And my ambition was to help basically restart the brewery. Why? Because the brewery had a multiplying economic effect on society. I mean, created jobs. We used local raw materials like sorghum. We paid taxes, and for me, it was important for the company to restart and hopefully contribute to basically the economic renaissance of Rwanda.
I mean, that's really brave, because someone could have said that I've seen this country go through the pits of hell.
Yes.
There's no coming back from this.
Yes. So I was actually offered a role to stay, an opportunity to stay in Congo as a brewery director in the DRC for one of the breweries. I refused, and I decided to go back home.
That's wild.
Yeah. So I was in Rwanda until 1995, and then the vice chairman of Heineken called me one day and said, Eugene, you've done a good job helping to rebuild the brewery. We now have a new opportunity for you to consider, and that is to go to the US and work for Heineken USA.
And then you did that, and then finally Moors.
Correct. So that's
Molson Coors, yes.
that's where my international career started. Went to the US, I was there for 4 years. Went to Holland, was there for 7 years. From Holland, when I was in Holland, I was actually commercial director for Africa. And then after that, I became a general manager for Brasserie de Bourbon, which is a Heineken brewery located on the island of La Réunion in the Indian Ocean. And we did a fantastic job there. I took over from somebody who had created a number of issues in the brewery. And this resulted in a shooting within the brewery that basically had one of the directors killed. And Heineken said, Eugene, there's a challenge for you. They sent me there, I turned the brewery around. And after that, I was sent to New York to head the Caribbean, the Canada, and Latin American business.
And you've obviously done a good job.
Yes.
So it's interesting to hear you, someone from Rutongo.
Yes.
Is now vice president.
Correct.
At Molson Coors.
Correct.
Third biggest brew company in the world.
No, you've done your research. Yes, that's the case.
We try. This is very unusual. I say it's unusual because, when you think about the spaces that people like you, people like me, and people who, because the whole point, we're having this conversation on the sidelines of Rwanda Day, and there's a lot of young people, who are going to Ivy League schools, Abanyarwanda, who are going to Ivy League schools and really going through these systems. And it's interesting to hear your story because what I take from it is it's really about taking up space.
Correct.
In places that have traditionally not been places that we are supposed to take space in.
Correct.
It's interesting because I want to learn from you because, again, Rwandan, you've done this, you've gone all over the world, you're here. There's always this talk about, this racial barrier, these glass ceilings that we have, but somehow you've gone through them and I guess come out through the other side.
Correct.
And I'd like for you to maybe take this moment to help us understand how you navigated these corporate spaces, how you came up, because there was a series of decisions that you made that put you on the right path.
Correct.
I'd like you to help us understand what those decisions were, how you navigated the challenges that you had to face, whether it is being put in situations, like you said, in La Réunion, where people were getting shot, and then somehow turning that around, and then, with what was happening in Rwanda, turning that around, and now you probably have the job of your lifetime, trying to turn, company 3 to now company 2, and then eventually make it the best in the world, the biggest in the world. What are the challenges? How do you navigate these spaces that you now find yourself in?
Now, to be completely sincere with you, when I was first hired at Bralirwa, I never imagined that my career would go on an international path the way it has. I felt that at best, I would eventually end up as a commercial director in one of the Heineken subsidiaries in Africa, in Burundi, Congo, Nigeria, or Ghana. So what I did was, I said to myself, I needed to be the best manager I could be. So I tried to learn as much as I could. And I also understood the power of patience. Today, the younger generations, they want to move fast. Back then, I knew that if I was patient, if I took the time to learn all the fundamentals of the brewing profession, that would eventually get me there. I knew I had a competitive advantage in that I spoke French, English, and Spanish, and I knew that I could leverage that beyond Bralirwa. I knew I could leverage that with Heineken headquarters back in Amsterdam. And that's how I ended up in the US, by the way. because they knew that I had been educated in the US. And back then, Heineken was a Dutch company that happened to be international. Okay, it was slowly but surely becoming more and more international, and Heineken needed diverse managers, leaders, people with different ways of thinking, people coming from different continents, different countries. So when I arrived in the US, by the way, when I got to the US, I was demoted.
Oh.
So I went from a commercial director to a sales rep. I guess somebody there felt that maybe, this guy coming from an obscure country, a known country, maybe it's better we put him in a sales rep role and allow him to learn the business.
I think you're being very kind.
And what happened is that actually allowed me to learn about the market very quickly.
Okay.
And once I understood the market, I started using my business skills, my analytical skills, my strategic thinking, and they quickly realized that I was much more than a sales rep. So in just 6 months, I was promoted from a sales rep in Washington, D.C. to a regional marketing director overseeing the entire southeast of the U.S.
Yes.
And from there, I went to Amsterdam, became a commercial director for Africa. And then I started realizing that these people that I worked with, Dutch people, French people, they were not better than me. I was probably more hungry than them because I was coming from more humble beginnings. And I started to realize that if you work hard, if you're ambitious, if you are driven, if you work with integrity, anything is possible. And from there, I became the first African to be a general manager in the entire Heineken system. Went to the Americas, was responsible for the Caribbean, Canada, South America, the first African to do so. And from there, I became managing director for Heineken Ethiopia as well. So when I left Heineken Ethiopia, Molson Coors came to me. And because Heineken and Molson Coors are partners in Canada, they remembered that I had been a good partner to them. And they immediately offered me the role that I have today, which is regional vice president, responsible for the central region and overseeing a $1.6 billion business.
So there's something that I think that is very interesting that you said, and that was you were hungrier than everyone else around you.
Absolutely, yes.
It's easy to be hungry when you're at the bottom. But somehow there's something about getting to a space that leads to a certain level of comfort, and you could have at any level decided that, I am comfortable here. Why didn't you ever fall into that trap?
I have always known that falling in a comfort zone is basically a dangerous situation to be in. I've always tried to challenge myself, reinvent myself. I've always tried to stay close to younger people, understand the trends, the technological innovations that are taking place in the world, the way the younger generations think, and this has helped me to be at the top of my profession. I've never been satisfied with what I had. I was always looking for more. The one thing that I really enjoyed during my 34 years in the beer industry was identifying young, talented people, grooming them, mentoring them, and seeing them flourish and become successful. A number of people that I've discovered in the Heineken system are currently, in some of the most senior leadership positions, including the current Heineken CEO. I basically gave him his first opportunity some 20 years ago. I took a bet on him because when I first met him, I sensed that there was something special about this guy. And he will also recognize it if you talk to him. and he's currently the Heineken Group CEO.
Yeah. You're a busy man. With all the work that you do, the teams you lead,
Yes.
and you're also a family man. And I'm a family man as well, and I know that time is such a precious, precious thing. You must find it so difficult to find time with all the things that you do,
Yeah.
to even maybe come back home. It's something that you have to really think about. So how do you keep a pulse on what is going on in Kigali, in Rwanda?
So even though I've left Rwanda in 1995 to become an expatriate manager with Heineken, I've always made sure to return home at least once a year. And I've always made sure, to bring my wife and my kids back home so that they could also understand our culture, the Rwandan culture. My wife is from France. My 3 kids were born abroad. My firstborn, Alexandra, was born in the US. And my other 2 children were born in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. So every year for the last 25 years, we've been coming back to Rwanda, except in the COVID period. And now I'm coming back to Rwanda more often because I'm a board director for the Bank of Kigali. I'm coming to Rwanda at least twice a year. Staying connected to my country for me is extremely important because that's where my roots are. And, I'm about to retire now, and I want to be more involved with my country and see how I can be meaningful, how I can play a meaningful role in the private sector.
It would be interesting because one of the things that I'm seeing back home now is the budding shoots of a micro brewery sector.
I've been following that as well.
Yeah. Is it something that now that, well, as soon as you retire, of course, I would love to. It would be probably quite amazing for you to walk into and talk to some of these young people who are trying to go into these spaces and kind of share with them what you.
I actually follow them on Instagram, and I like some of the things that they do. I'm very impressed by a lot of these new brands, craft brands that they've been creating. And once I'm more often in Kigali, I'll make sure to go and visit them and try I've already tried their products. So
yes,
they're doing a very good job.
Are you, when you talk about retirement, are you going to, do the classic Rwandan retirement, which is, go sit in a farm somewhere with your cows, or are you maybe going to open some businesses and? Yeah,
I think for me, retirement is going to be a new chapter in my life. I want to stay active in boards. I'm looking to be involved in at least 2 for-profit boards and 1 non-profit. I'm going to be traveling with my wife on a regular basis. I'm going to be doing a lot of sports because I'm a cyclist. I like to do long road cycling. I'm into running. So I do at least 1 10K a week.
Amazing.
Yes, I'm also going to look at some startups that I find quite interesting. There's a few young people who have come to me asking for mentorship. I'm going to see, how to get involved in those initiatives, maybe invest or provide some strategic guidance to some of these young people that are trying to create new companies.
Now that would be amazing because, it's the idea of diaspora is not just them being over there.
No.
But bringing some of those skills and knowledge and bringing it back home.
Yes, that's the idea.
Yes.
So I'm not going to be sitting back doing nothing. I'm going to be as active as I am today, but in a different way.
Okay. So my last question. You're speaking. You'll be speaking on a panel today at Rwanda Day.
Correct. Yes.
What will the panel be about?
So the panel will be about I'm part of an economic development panel, which will be focusing on sports and entertainment. This is a space that Rwanda is getting involved in because it's a space that is going to create new economic opportunities. And I'm going to use a few examples from the US that I've been personally involved in. And hopefully we can learn from this experience and see how we can have Rwanda benefit from them.
Yeah. Why did you were obviously invited to the panel.
Yes.
And I'm sure that you jumped at the opportunity. Why did you find it so important to be a part of not just the panel, but I'm seeing your daughter here, I'm seeing your wife here in Rwanda Day. Why was it so important for you to be a part of this?
Rwanda, for me, is something bigger than I am.
Yes.
I feel a very strong bond with my country, and I'm especially very encouraged and inspired by what our leadership is doing to transform this country. I mean, the history of Rwanda, the genocide, the reconciliation process. This takes a lot of hard work, and it's not easy. And I'm just in admiration when I see all the things that our president has been doing. And I believe that, if we can support him, we should. And I would urge all my fellow Rwandans living, abroad in different diaspora communities to do the same.
Yeah. Eugene, thank you so much for joining me on
Thank
the
you.
platform. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
I did.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed the conversation today, share your thoughts with us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.